Okay, and I guess I should give my caveat first that it's been a while. So I might stumble along forgetting what I actually said because I'm just going on my outline. So that may happen. If it does, oh well. So at the time of my writing this, I had just recently gone and visited a friend that I didn't know very well. It was my first get together with her, but I knew we wanted to be friends. So we had a play date. We were at her house, and everything about it was really fun for me. I really loved being with her. I found her really easy to talk to and thought, oh, this is a relationship I want to pursue. I want to be friends with her. My kids got along with her kids. I really loved her kids. I just thought everything about her and her family was wonderful and just had such a good impression. And yet I was so sad as the time went on. We spent a good chunk of time together that I realized that she didn't seem to see herself the same way I was seeing her. And as I have gotten to know her since, I like her and am impressed with her even more, and yet still feel this sense that she doesn't see it quite like I see it. And it was from some of the things that she said, just little tiny comments of she didn't think her house was enough and they hadn't moved in all the way, and yet she thought she should have by now, and her kids were well behaved, but was she really giving them what they needed? And these thoughts are thoughts that we all have, but they were coming out a lot in the conversation to the degree that I was wondering, how is she really seeing herself? Is she seeing what I see? Or is she so caught up in these things that she's not seeing what's great and going on in there? And it was really a significant experience for me. So we're going to keep that in mind. We'll revisit that story later on. James Allen in As a Man Thinketh said, a particular train of thought persisted in, be it good or bad, cannot fail to produce its results on the character. And he also said, he who lives constantly in the conception of noble and lofty thoughts, who dwells upon all that is pure and unselfish, will become wise and noble in character, and will rise into a position of influence and blessedness. So his premise was that our thoughts will impact our character. And so I thought, if that's true, and we improve our thoughts, just from working on our thoughts, we'll improve our character. And Covey agrees with that as well. He says, well, he was quoting someone else, but he says, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. So Allen teaches to practice looking for the effects of our thoughts and learn principles about thoughts and about the effects of our thoughts. And by learning those principles and practicing, we'll be able to see what the effects of our thoughts are and how they play out in our lives. So I thought about, we all have unwelcome thoughts, so what can we do with them? And I thought of 3 choices. We can embrace them and just continue on in our unwelcome thoughts. That's an option we have. Or we could,
unfortunately,
and I think it's the unconscious one we take a lot, but we can reject our thoughts completely and replace them with something else. Or we can acknowledge that we have the thought, but not give it any weight. So that thought came, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to pursue it. I'm not going to go further. So we could replace it, or we could just say, that was a thought. Okay. And, not give it any more credit than that.
Can I say something?
Yes.
My seminary teacher, actually he's not my seminary teacher anymore, but he was for a while. He says, thoughts are kind of like birds. And of course everybody goes, what? And he says, there's not much you can do to stop a bird from flying over your head. But if it settles down and tries to make a nest in your hair, you're just going to let it sit there? Because you're walking around in school. Have you noticed there's a seagull on your head? Yeah, his name's Freddy. Stay for a while.
that's great.
No, dude, stop it. You chase it away. Do something to make it go away, and you probably won't come back. Maybe it will. If it does, then you chase it away again.
Yeah.
That's just...
That is a really good analogy. Next time I have a thought that I don't want, I'll be like, stupid bird. Get off my head! What are you doing?
And he said, there's certain things you can do. You can stay around good people. You can make sure that you're listening to good music or whatever. There's certain things you can do with birds too. You can wear a hat. You can carry a gun. There's precautions you can take, and it's smarter to take.
That is awesome.
I
I'm
just thought I would
putting that in my presentation that evolves that I randomly sometimes give is now going to have a bird analogy.
That's great.
I love it. So, and it really ties well in with what President Packer said that I was going to go.
Oh, but he loves birds.
Next.
Perfect.
And I just said next, and so I wrote next. I hope I just remember. If not, there's a video. I can remember what you said. So President Packer said, the mind is like a stage. During every waking moment, the curtain is up. There's always some act being performed on that stage. Have you noticed that shady little thoughts may creep in from the wings and attract your attention in the middle of almost any performance and without any real intent on your part? These delinquent thoughts will try to upstage everybody. If you permit them to go on, all thoughts of any virtue will leave the stage. If you can fill your mind with clean and constructive thoughts, there will be no room for these persistent imps, and they will leave. So that's, yeah. And the birds with the nest. So there were a few examples from the books that we read that really showed to me how our character is affected by our thoughts. And the presentation was originally written and intended for the audience of the classmates who had all read the same books. So if you haven't read a book, bear with me on the.
What are the books?
Well, we did As a Man Thinketh, and the Covey quotes are from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Then I'm going to keep talking a little bit about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I already said that. A Man for All Seasons, about Thomas More. We also talked about, who else do I quote? The Hiding Place, Corey Tenboom. And I think that's all. Well, and then have you guys read The Last Battle, the Narnia? Are you familiar enough with Narnia?
7.
Yeah, the last.
We got about halfway through it. I've only been halfway through it.
Okay, so those are all what, and I mean, I think the examples can make sense
Oh, sure.
anyway,
Yeah,
but
they've been great.
it just makes more sense if you're all, it made sense a lot for my classmates who had all just read all these books too. Anyway, so Dr. Jekyll and Thomas More are kind of opposites on the spectrum of their thoughts and where the thoughts led in their characters. So here's Dr. Jekyll. Some of his thoughts were, he was selfish and he was untrue. His thoughts were untrue, and they brought the downfall of his character. He thought his sins weren't as bad as others' sins, and so he justified his sins. He thought he was bringing about more good than other people, which also allowed him to justify his sins because of all the good he was doing. He thought he could just get rid of Mr. Hyde, obviously, representing the evil in his nature, at any time, which I think made him think that he wasn't in any hurry, because he could just do it whenever. He found comfort in separating the two sides of his character, in being Jekyll and knowing that this other, and just not taking responsibility for Hyde. He just separated the two. He thought his evil side was natural and legitimate, and that it should just have full reign. And that he, as Jekyll, was safe from the consequences of Hyde's choices. And he focused on himself and not the impact that turning into Hyde made on other people. So all these thoughts, and it's such a stark contrast because, they make the story where he becomes really a different person, and yet really what it's representing is this other side of each of us, of our natures. Thomas More, on the other hand, stayed true to his conscience, and he found that brought peace and assurance of his path. He said that a man should go where he won't be tempted. That's a line in the play that he says to someone else. A man should go where he won't be tempted. That he thought about himself, that he must rule himself, and that he was capable of keeping oaths, and that he was one who stands fast. He said a person is under the most obligation to be loyal to his conscience, and that he respected himself. Those were some of his thoughts. And it led for him, I don't know how familiar you are with his story, led for him staying true to himself and his principles through imprisonment, not doing what the king wanted him to do, not endorsing the king's bad behavior. So then he was imprisoned and finally martyred, but he stayed true to himself through that. So
That was King Henry VIII, is that right?
I think so. Now I don't remember for sure. I don't actually know my history of that time period.
Well, I'm trying to think.
And that
Was it
place.
Thomas More that was accused of adultery with Anne Boleyn? Or was that someone else?
I think that was someone else.
Okay.
That doesn't sound familiar. I mean, from my year ago reading the play.
Okay.
And I
I'm
didn't
not-
study his
I'm not
life.
as familiar. I'm not familiar
Yeah.
enough to know which one. I know there's several, but
Yeah.
okay.
So, one way that we can shape our thoughts is looking for truth. And so I want to talk a little bit about finding truth in our thoughts. Covey says that feelings and our moods and our thoughts are not facts. They're not necessarily true. So we can have true thoughts and we can have lies, that our thoughts can be lies. And so if we seek true thoughts, that's what's going to improve our character. If we're believing lies, that's not going to be helping our character. And Freud, this is interesting that this quote is Freud's, said, "To be completely honest with oneself is the very best effort a human being can make." I know, huh? It's a good quote. He had a good sentence right
A
there.
good thought.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. Good job, Freud. You got one.
That's great.
So, in the last battle, there was examples of truth versus lies that people believed. And I just have the names, and I'm hoping that I can pull from a year ago to remember the examples. But Puzzle was the donkey that, then the ape, I don't remember what the ape's name is.
Shifty, something like that. Shift.
Yeah, Shift, yeah.
Something like that.
Shift tried to convince Puzzle to pretend that he was a lion. And Puzzle believed all sorts of things about himself that Shift was able to just kind of steer him
That's right.
along.
Okay.
And so a lot of the things that Puzzle believed weren't true, and yet he wanted to do good, but he didn't have enough truth anchoring him, and so he was able to just be steered. And then it talks about the dwarves in there, and the dwarves were at first tricked by Puzzle and his being Aslan, and then later on, when they knew about, when there was the real Aslan and when there was some truth that they could find, they rejected it because they said, no, we have been tricked before, we're not going there. We're protecting ourselves, and that is it. And then in the later scenes, in the heaven part, the dwarfs couldn't see. They didn't know where they were. They thought they were in the stable. They thought everything smelled bad and was manure all around them. And everything that the people did to try and say, no, look, open your eyes, see where we are. They couldn't see it, they couldn't smell it, they couldn't tell. They were close to the truth. Runewit was the centaur that in the beginning of the story goes and talks to the king and says, these are the signs of what's been happening about Aslan's coming. I don't remember all the details, but he said, there's rumor of this happening. This is what I see in the heavens. This is what the signs say. This is what I know is right. And he was the one, that was anchored. And then King Tyrion was good and tried to find the truth, but didn't completely go with what Runewit said. He was a little shaken, and then in the end went with truth. I don't remember too much of the detail, but it was interesting how, just looking at each different character or group of characters, how they sought for truth and where it led them.